concerts have built themselves on a very iconic look that has set the definition and scene for Vocaloid concerts for over a decade. A style of show that manages to intrigue people who aren't even aware what a Vocaloid is, and has essentially become the branding for Vocaloid concerts. However, there has been a shift in the scene, with this core and iconic piece slowly disappearing with each recent event in the last couple of years, with its retirement basically being confirmed with a very recent announcement. But why is that? How is it after all these years, such a core piece of what made Miku concerts so iconic is changing for seemingly good? So let's try to discover that reason as we discuss the disappearance of the hologram at Hatsune Miku concerts. From the very beginning of Miku's concert career, all the way back in 2009, she has been presented and performed through a very specific medium, which is the hologram. Although it isn't a real hologram, it has been dubbed so by the fans due to the fact it is simulating the effect of one. So what actually is it? Most people believe it's a technique called the Pepper's Ghost effect, however that is not the technique used in this case. The Pepper's Ghost effect, in short, uses reflections to bounce light from the object that is wanting to be presented to the area they want to present it to hide the original source of where the object really is and give it that ghostly effect. However, Miku concerts use a much simpler and obvious technique, rear end projection. Simply setting up a projector behind transparent plexiglass or another transparent material and beaming the video directly onto it. And in the early concerts, the projectors are very easy to spot directly behind the screen. But they have also placed the projectors in various different spots, including above the screen and beaming down, and to the side of the screen beaming sideways, which helps create a more immersive effect as you can no longer see really bright dots behind the screen. And from 2023, they began to hide the projectors even further, lowering them down beneath the stage Miku stands on, so you cannot see any projector at all, the only clue to them being there being the light lines beaming up towards Miku's image. This has been the look and technique used at Miku concerts for 16 years. So with each new concert announced, this is the technology people expected to see. However, in April of 2024, when Miku Expo kicked off after a 4-year hiatus of in-person concerts, people were stunned to find that this technology was nowhere in sight, and instead, in its place, was a giant wall of LED panels, which despite people's hopes, has continued to pop up at each new concert announced, slowly and slowly replacing each event's projectors with LED. Starting with Miku Expo, then Miku with You, then multiple events in Japan, and finally, it was confirmed that the last remaining event to still be using the projector setup through these 2 years will in fact now be using LED technology as well. But why, after 16 years of using projector technology that essentially made Miku concert's image, have they suddenly decided to switch over to something else out of the blue? But the truth is, despite everyone believing the LED screen came out of absolutely nowhere, 2024 was not the first time an LED screen was used at a Miku concert in place of the projector setup. In fact, the LED screen was first used all the way back in 2011 for the very first Mikupa event, Mikupa Tokyo. This was the third Miku concert to ever take place, and under a different organizer to the prior two, they decided to try something different to the rear end projection, which was an LED screen. Yet despite the projector setup only being used twice beforehand, people very quickly voiced their despise over this different screen setup, expressing that the screen lacked realism, and the fact that you could see this black square made it feel like they were just watching a computer or a TV screen. This sounds super familiar, doesn't it? After the event finished, when these criticisms came to light, an apology was issued. However, this was not the end of the LED screen being used at the concerts, because just a few months later, it returned at Mikupa Sapporo 2011, but the criticisms weren't ignored as the rear-end projection returned as well. In this event, the projection was used as the primary screen where most of the performances took place, while the LED screen was elevated and used as a secondary screen with only a few performances taking place on it. And this dual setup became the standard for Mikupa concerts in Japan, being used at Tokyo 2012, Sapporo 2013, and the final Mikupa event, Mikupa Kansai 2013, which is where the iconic performance of Miku flying out from the glass screen took place, with her flying up from the projection screen onto the raised LED screen. But it would be this performance in 2013 that the LED screen had seemingly been retired for good at the concerts, as the Mikupa concert series ended and Magical Mirai began, with Magical Mirai's main focus being a much wider projector setup. A new setup had arrived for them to explore, so the LED screen disappeared into concert history. That is, until Crypton wanted to explore again. As for Magical Mirai 2021, they experimented with their performances once again. During this concert, for 5 songs of the setlist, a giant mesh was lowered down, creating a large canvas for extra visuals to play during the performances. And you can see Miku is higher up compared to where she was before, and that is because here she's being projected on an LED screen. I believe this choice also wasn't very highly liked, but I can't find any sources to back that up. But after 8 years, the LED screen had made an unexpected return. However, even with this, aside from Tokyo 2011, the projector setup had been the primary screen used in all of these events, with the LED screen never being used for more than 5 performances each concert. So still, for a very long time, the projector setup remained as the main and primary setup for the concerts. Until it resurfaced once more for Miku Fest 2024 and became the first concert in 13 years to not use the projector setup at all. But unlike the first attempt, this concert was very well received and there were minimal complaints over the screen type, which could have been down to the fact that this event was quite different than previous, with the concert mainly being focused on producers doing DJ sets instead of just the characters performing, so it could have been likely people were too excited about the event to even notice the screen change. Or quite possibly, people didn't even notice the change due to how the stage design perfectly encloses all edges of the screen, so you could not see the edge of the dark square compared to 2011. So it quite likely just looked like they were hiding the projectors underneath the stage like they had recently been doing. But then the change became quickly noticeable at Miku Expo 2024 as the tour kicked off in Vancouver. It was not hidden at all and was very clearly just a black box stuck in the middle of the stage with zero attempt to blend it in at all, with stage lights even running brightly behind the screen, illuminating the black void further, which was met with the backlash we are all familiar with. Nobody liked the sudden change without any disclaimer or explanation, let alone it being so poorly executed, which honestly had no excuse for how it was handled during this tour. And during the first set of concerts, people decided to hold on to the belief that the projector setup was being held at Coachella, and this LED setup was just a temporary thing, which was a ridiculous theory looking back on it. But as Coachella came, and the LED screen remained, it became obvious that this temporary setup may in fact be permanent. So much so that not just Western fans were worried about this development. Both Chinese and Japanese fans were all worried as well, to the point an official clarification was made to calm the worry. Miku With You had a post made to clarify that the show would be the same format as its previous events, and within a broadcast for Magical Mirai, it was clarified that the stage would be the exact same format as before. And yet they never made a statement about Miku Expo, so it really shows you how they treat different events. But it was clear that this decision was not a well-liked one, and the outcry was loud enough for Crypton to notice and worry. So Miku With You and Magical Mirai went on with the projector setup without any issues. Then after Magical Mirai concluded, Miku Expo came back around again, and came the question of, will the projector setup return due to the backlash? And the answer was no, it did not. The LED screen was back again for the Europe tour, although blended in much better than before, people still weren't very happy. This setup then went on to be used at the Miku Expo New Zealand and Australia tour before the year came to a close, concluding 2024's round of Miku concerts with 4 events using the LED setup and 3 events using the projector setup. In the new year, the next event came along, the Japan Blooming Tour, and much to nobody's surprise, it was the projector setup. And Magical Mirai came around again, once more with the projector setup, which again was expected. The real test was going to be Miku Expo Asia 2025, a brand new year and brand new tour. An argument could have been made that all of the 2024 expos had to use the LED screen for consistency reasons, as they were all under the same umbrella tour for the 10th anniversary of Miku Expo, where changing the screen type in the middle of the tour would cause further outcry from those that did receive the LED screen. But the Asia tour didn't have those bounds for consistency, and was also taking place over a year after the complaints started, complaints which Crypton definitely heard loud and clear, so it was now the true test to see how Miku Expo was going to be handled moving forward. Projector setup returns, they've listened to the complaints and worry of the fans, and realised using this new medium wasn't the best way forward, or keep the LED screen, and the scene for these concerts are shifting into a new direction. And as the tour began, it was once again an LED screen. But this time, it was upgraded, becoming much wider and being the same length as the Magical Mirai screen, which now meant that Miku Expo could now perform songs that needed this wider stage, including having all the characters on screen at once, which had never been possible with the smaller screen Miku Expo has been using since the beginning. The surrounding stage had also been improved further, allowing the screen to blend in better. It wasn't perfect, but it was much better than 2024. And then the final event for 2025 came around, Miku with You, which was advertised from the beginning it was going to feature LED screens. However, this time it was in a style much different to Miku Expo, featuring massive screens that displayed extra visuals. Opinions were still a little mixed, with many saying the visuals sometimes overwhelmed Miku and just emphasized how tiny she was in comparison, but people enjoyed this experimentation. But it was this event that many people were coming to realize that the projector setup was slowly being phased out, which became harder to deny as at the beginning of 2026, the Lawson 50th anniversary event took place, which was a 3-day show event. A 3-day residency show that did not require any travelling or multiple setup takedowns, a setup that could sit there for 3 days without being altered, a perfect environment for the projector setup which were all the same conditions for previous Magical Mirai concerts, and yet they used the LED screen. The Project Voltage Live concert then followed, which many expected to be interesting from the get-go, as a teaser that was posted before the event showing one of the performances showed Pokemon flying quite high above Miku and Kaito, which was way higher than the usual screen size would allow, and lo and behold, this event brought on a whole new take of what Hatsune Miku concerts could be. A massive LED screen displaying visual stages and backgrounds to further elevate these performances to a scale we have never seen at Miku concerts before, which was executed so well, people's opinion of the LED had completely switched, becoming hopeful now seeing the possibilities it can offer at its full potential, and not just the bad excuse it was at the beginning of Miku Expo. Yet, even with all this, people still admire and want the projector setup, due to its iconic look and being the style Miku concerts have been from the beginning. But that's okay, because Magical Mirai has not changed its image once in all of these years, and will likely stay the staple of the classic Miku concert look. Except at the beginning of March, during the first promotional material for Magical Mirai 2026, it was clarified that Magical Mirai will also be switching to using an LED setup, marking the final event left standing with the projector setup to fall to the LED screen. Minus the Japan tour, but we won't find out that until next year, which doesn't have a very promising outlook considering every other event has switched. So why is it that all of these events are now switching and changing its setup after so many years of sticking to one style? Unfortunately, Crypton are known for not being a very transparent company, often never responding or explaining their reasonings for their choices. The lack of statement after the sudden change in screen for Miku Expo 2024 being evidence of that, as they did not tell anyone prior to the event beginning the projection medium was changing at all, and then never addressed the outrage afterwards. But I believe there are two categories for the answer as to why they have suddenly changed technologies, which are stylistic reasons and practical reasons. First, let's cover the practical reasons. The projector setup and the LED setup are very different when it comes to setting up its respective equipment. Starting off with the projector setup, the core pieces are the transparent panels and of course the projectors. And to make it work, they have to point the projectors at the panels. Sounds easy, right? Except it's not. First, all the panels have to be precisely lined up together and hung from struts above, and if they aren't lined precisely, there is risk of there being a visible line through the characters if they walk or stand in that area. In the same boat, there can't be any marks or scratches on the screen, as they can also distort the image. Then, once that's secure, it's time to bring in the projectors, that need to have their placement planned out for the best coverage of the screen, to ensure that Miku will be continuously bright no matter what part of the screen she's on, otherwise she'd end up dimming and fading away if she moves to a certain spot. And for that, you need multiple projectors, which again sounds simple, until you realise all of these projectors need to be projecting one single image, so need to be lined up perfectly in order to do so. And from a behind the scenes in 2012, you can see just how tedious it is to line up all of these projectors. If they aren't perfectly aligned, it can lead to a blurry image. The projectors also need to be a precise distance away from the glass, which for overseas tours can get tedious to calculate as the venue stages all vary in size, so they may not be able to go in with a standard projector distance calculation, as some or even just one venue could have a stage size too small for it to work, and so would need to tweak everything to perform in that venue. Not only that, each projector need to have a different slice of the video render, otherwise if they were all given the exact same file, multiple Mikus would be projected at the same time doing the same thing on different parts of the screen. as you can see in the behind the scenes here, with different splices of performance on different sections. I have no idea what program they use, so it could be automatically calculated, but it's still another thing they have to precisely line up to get a perfect image. So the setup for the projector screen is laborious, taking so much time and planning for such a delicate setup, which also needs experts who know how to go about setting it up. This fact is stated in an interview that took place in 2020 surrounding Miku's recent announcement of performing at Coachella, with the Crypton representative stating there's a whole team who's there to do the prep and control the visuals, and that it's such a specific type of show they have to ship out an entire crew over from Japan to make it happen, which then leads into the cost of running the projector setup. This setup is expensive, with touring costing even more than residency shows like Magical Mirai. First, the projectors themselves are expensive. I'm not sure if they've ever stated the exact projectors that they use, but just searching up high quality projectors, these things are expensive, which at Magical Mirai, they used to use 7 projectors at a time, and that was only the ones that were on. In Mirai 2013, you're able to see that above each of these projectors, there is another set of projectors being backups in case the main ones malfunctioned. But due to how many they used at a time, it is more than likely that they rent these projectors rather than having bought so many of these expensive things, especially when over time, newer and higher quality projectors would be released and would quickly make the ones they bought 5 years ago not look that great. But even still, renting all of these projectors is still super expensive, like this one I found here, so times that by 5 or 7, and also for around 2 to 3 weeks depending on the event, it adds up super fast, which also increases again for touring. Either they rent these from Japan and take them overseas, or they have to find another company in the region that they're going to tour to hire the projector locally. Both ways likely have a high insurance fee for them to be able to travel around with them, which means they have to take care when traveling, taking it slower to travel to locations to ensure the projectors don't get damaged in the rush, which would also protect the glass panels from any scratches or scuffs that could be caused by trying to move fast. This causes tours to take longer, meaning they can't visit as many locations in a certain time period to meet demand, and so cannot perform to as many people and places as they want to, and also not gather as much profit as they could, which, judging from a couple past interview statements, they were likely barely reaching profit margins when it comes to tours, which I'll touch on in just a second. Alongside equipment and travel costs for the tours, there is also visa fees for all of the specialist team members that they have to bring along to operate the equipment, which does vary from country to country. However, if we use the USA as an example, the previous visa application fee for the US was $460 per application, but after 2024, it rose to $1,600. So if you multiply that by, let's say, 10 specialist team members, that's $4,600 for previous tour visa applications, but over $16,000 in 2026, which is an insane increase. And that's not even including band members. As I mentioned before, in a few interviews, Crypton have stated that Miku concerts are expensive to create in general. One interview from 2012, when asked if Miku would ever perform in the UK, the response was that these concerts are costly. And from another interview in 2018, they state that it costs tens of millions of yen to produce just one live concert, and that's even when they reuse previously created performance assets. Granted, these statements are about the entirety of the concert creation process. However, in both interviews, they state that the problem is the technologies and that they are trying to find ways to reduce the costs, as the current expenses were too high to be able to reach the expected demand from the fans. They needed to explore new technologies to be able to meet the demand of all the fans across the world, a technology that lowered their current expense costs and could travel to all of these places. And I believe they have found that technology. The LED screen. The LED screen is able to cut down on many of these expenses by cutting out the high cost the projector setup requires, starting with that the setup does not require specialists. Majority of these LED screen walls are able to click into place, which we can see the setup of it happening at Coachella, and also these time lapses that were posted by one of the crew members of the NA 2026 tour, meaning that instead of having to fly over their team of specialists for overseas shows, they can just hire the local touring team, which is already setting up the external stage design, to set up the LED screen as well. And there is no worry of the venue stages not having enough breathing room for the projectors, as the LED can just sit right in the center of the stage, no problem. The LED also doesn't run into the issues of lines between screens and scratches, as the LED panels are made to seamlessly link together, and while they likely are delicate as well, they are much more durable than a projector and the glass panels, which can easily get damaged by a simple slip-up. This isn't to say that the LED screen doesn't have its own imaging issues, and so far there has only been one documented case of it during Miku Expo 2024, where one of the panels malfunctioned and just started beaming bright purple every time a character walked over it, which can be a very annoying issue, especially if one was to malfunction right in the middle of the screen where the characters usually stand. However, it still has the one-up against the projector's imaging issues, because it can very easily be fixed in the middle of a show, which is exactly what happened at Miku Expo 2024. While the projector's issues cannot be fixed in the middle of a show, if there's a misalignment, it's going to be there for the entire show. If you can see the lines between where the screens connect, it's going to be there for the entire show. If there's a scratch on the screen, it's going to be there for the entire tour. So when it comes to possible mistakes in the setup, the LED has the one-up because it reduces the possible mistakes and reduces how much the mistake will affect the show, because it's able to be fixed without having to pause the show, and also because it's able to be fixed during a show, whereas with the projector's issues, you just have to sit and deal with it, even if it's completely ruining the viewer experience. The cost to rent this equipment though, I struggle to find prices, as these sites require inquiries instead of just stating their prices, so I cannot give a proper comparison point, but it's likely that they cost around the same that multiple projectors do to rent during this period, and due to LED screens being much more commonly used than projectors, finding places to rent these LED screens are likely more very readily available compared to projectors, so could also be cheaper due to them being more common. But the way that the LED screen comes out cheaper is that it cuts the cost of having to fly in the specialists, and also, due to how quickly it can be set up and put away, cuts travel times, allowing them to travel faster and perform at more places than the projector could in a certain time frame. The best example to show this is that in 2016, with the projector setup, they toured 10 locations in North America, totaling 14 concerts in 44 days. In 2024, with the LED screen setup, in North America once more, they toured 17 locations, totaling 21 concerts in 48 days, which actually bumps up to 18 locations and 23 concerts when we factor in they had to travel to Coachella twice. And that is an undeniable jump, especially considering how high and far the demand for these concerts now are, which, paired with this demand, comes the need to hire larger venues, which the LED screen once more holds the plus side, because when it comes to brightness, the projector setup is sadly lacking compared to the LED. Now, the projectors are bright and have gotten brighter over the years compared to the first concerts. However, due to the fact the projectors are projecting onto a transparent material, not all of the light gets caught, and even with the most powerful projector, you are still going to lose a lot of light. Not to mention, the projection is also prone to interference from the light show, with the characters easily getting washed out by the moving lights, especially if they point towards them, but your experience could also be interfered due to wherever you're viewing the screen from. The projector's main priority is being projected straight forward in the middle of the screen, so if you're viewing from a side angle, it can appear dimmer. So that, paired with the flatness issue, which both screens have by the way, makes it very hard to view the show from the sides, which becomes a problem when you're wanting to fill a venue. So the LED screen holds the plus here, because no matter the light show or the angle, the screen will always hold a consistent brightness. Not to mention, even if the show stopped having a light show, the projector setup would still face interference, as the light sticks very brightly reflect off of the glass panels. For some reason, when it comes to the LED versus hologram argument, some people think the reflecting light sticks aren't an issue anymore for the hologram, and I think this argument is likely based on the Magical Mirai footage, as you do not see any. However, that is because Magical Mirai's stage is raised, and due to the angling, the light sticks don't reach the screen much compared to older videos, but you can in some spots still see the reflection. However, this is only the case for Magical Mirai setup in Osaka and Tokyo, as they take place in large convention halls that have a completely flat floor. The second you add any variation in people's positionings, like here at Magical Mirai 2025 for Sendai shows which took place in a theatre, here are the light stick reflections still going strong. And say the projectors were still being used for Miku Expo today, many people have been using non-official light sticks, which have proven to be much brighter than the official ones. The screen would be full of harsh reflections that would be impossible to ignore. Comparing it to the LED screen, which does not display a single reflection, retaining the dark background instead of reflecting back a giant sea of light sticks. Yes, the light show paired with the smoke will still interfere with your view of the LED screen, but its own brightness will not be affected and has a higher chance of shining through these blockages compared to the projectors that will get washed away within them. Miku Expo has been barreling through larger and larger venues, going from performing in theatres to now regularly selling out arenas. And in November, Miku is going to be performing in the largest arenas in London and Paris, which have a maximum capacity of 20,000 people. And as someone who's seen the projector setup in person, as well as being seated in the nosebleeds of the O2, I honestly believe it would be a struggle to near impossible to make out the characters on that screen all the way at the back of these venues. I sometimes struggle to see the LED screen through the light show in 2024 at times, so if I struggle to see the LEDs fuller brightness at half the distance of those arena top seats, I honestly do not think the projectors would work in such a large venue. But hey, Magical Mirai have always been held in large venues, and they've had the projector set up just fine. Yes, they have. But while the projectors can be bright, they cannot offer the same level of steady and assured brightness that the LED screen does. As when we compare faraway shots using the projector and faraway shots using the LED screen, you can already tell the LED provides a much assured and solid brightness compared to the projector, which I think is very much a need in these larger venues. As for Magical Mirai, you can see people are seated on the very far sides here, and as we've covered, the projector's image tends to fade quite a lot when viewing from the side angle. Now we don't really get any footage of what it's like viewing from these side angles, but since we know the projector fades from this angle, the LED screen has the one-up for these side-seated areas, as the LED screen's brightness does not fade and is consistent from every angle you view it from. Like, projection medium aside, I can't even imagine what these people's view is like. But as it currently stands, yes, Magical Mirai switching to the LED screen is the most shocking of them all, since the projection setup has worked out so well for it all of these years. But at least at Magical Mirai, they have these side screens that focus on the characters to help those further back see the finer details clearer, which helps and negates the projector's lower brightness for those at the back. However, for Miku Expo, despite now performing in more and more larger venues, the side screens are rarely seen anymore, a time when they're needed more than ever in these multi-thousand capacity venues, which is a separate issue I think they seriously need to change, especially if they're going to perform at the largest arena in London. But since they haven't been using them, it's a good thing that they are using the LED screen, as the lack of side screens would make it much more difficult for most people in these larger venues to view the projector screen. So, since the projector setup has worked out so well for Magical Mirai for so long, I believe the decision to switch the event over to the LED screen lies within the stylistic reasons. For essentially 15 years straight, Miku concerts have been presented in the exact same way. Yes, the character models have updated and changed. Yes, the scale of the event has changed. Yes, the way they perform songs has changed. But the core part of the show, the presentation medium, has barely changed in all of these years. The only real time the standard was switched up was during the Miku Part era, where they used the dual screen setup, and the one quick test at Magical Mirai 2021 with the large mesh to express extra visuals. But other than those quick moments, the base show has been the same. Glass screen, projectors, and characters in their own little bubble. So after 15 years in the show industry, Crypton have hardly even explored the possibilities for how they could evolve these concerts. But how could they evolve them? And what does poorly switching the iconic screen on a random Thursday with no explanation have to do with it? Well, that is an entirely different issue that was definitely poorly managed with no excuse, but switching to the LED screen was their first step in the next evolution of Miku concerts. Of which, other than it being cheaper, the evolution didn't show itself until almost 2 years after the first switch. And that was Miku With You 2025. The event was advertised as being different, being described as breaking the original boundaries, expanding the stage to its limits, with massive dynamic visuals and multi-layered LED screens. And we knew it was going to be groundbreaking, as the typical 2 to 3 cities Miku With You typically performed in had been reduced to just 1, meaning this expanding stage was big enough to not travel to extra cities. And when it came to showtime, they were not joking. They used these huge LED screens bigger than anything that had ever been seen at a Miku concert before, of which they all were used to display extra visuals to elevate each song's performances in a way that makes Magical Mirai 2021's trial look like child's play. We only have a small amount of official footage and fan footage to go off of, but these visuals completely blew away the limits of how Miku concerts could be held. Granted, not everybody enjoyed this, thinking the visuals were way too much or took away from Miku too much, but with a little bit of balance, these visuals can elevate performances performances so much by placing Miku and the others into an actual interesting environment rather than a void, which they then go on to improve at the Project Voltage live event in March of 2026. This event also took to using a much larger LED display and created environments that were much more immersive. Unfortunately, I'm too scared of Pokemon to use any of the footage from the concert, but rather than having flashy visuals, Project Voltage went for more stage-like environments, which honestly elevated the immersion so much more than the decorative visuals used at Miku with You. While those visuals added more flashy and vibrant effects, decorating the stage around the characters, the Project Voltage visuals created the staging, placing the characters into an environment and making the visuals and the characters feel like one whole piece rather than two pieces working around each other. The Project Voltage visuals worked more on incorporating the characters into them and helped make it feel that yes, these characters are right there in that environment. They're in that field. They're in that stage work rising on those stairs. They're interacting with those stage props. And this is the most that Miku has ever felt like this, as even with the projector setup, she has still always been restricted to her own little void, and has rarely had a setup that she could interact with and feel more present on the stage, with the most so far before this being interacting with mic stands, speakers, and only very recently floating on a rising platform at Magical Mirai 2025. So these new stage visuals are a huge step in the right direction to help elevate Miku's stage presence and immersion, as now that she has the ability to be in an environment she can actually interact with, there is huge potential in the type of performances that can take place, and if fully developed further, could escalate to immersion levels the projector setup would never be able to achieve. The reaction to this event was much better received compared to Miku with You. However, some people have decided that maybe they can't get their hopes up too high for these performances to become frequent, because the event was co-run by Pokemon, so believe there could have been a lot more funding involved in this project compared to the average Miku event. That is yet to be seen, but could still be a possibility. Magical Mirai 2026 at this moment has only been confirmed to be an LED setup, but not what type of setup. So it could either be the typical Mirai setup with the wider LED screen switched in, or it could be the larger screen that is used here. Although, most logically, the wider LED will be used, as the third city's venue this year is very small, and this is the stage they're working with, which they also have to fit 5 band members onto. But honestly, for the average Miku event, I don't see the need for a screen this big. I think even half the size would be plenty of room to create interesting stage visuals, but even then, the wider LED size doesn't prevent them from using extra visuals. Because at Miku Expo North America 2026, they did just that and utilised the whole of the LED screen to add additional visuals for some of the songs. They were a different style to Project Voltage, not having enough room to create a whole stage environment, but also having a physical stage design around it, which has the potential to clash with the on-screen elements. But even so, these visuals were used in another way to still elevate the performances to get the characters out of the void. A range of different styles were used at this event, which were likely all experimental to see what style best elevates the performances. For Kimiguru Mercy's performance, the entire screen was used to simulate the box from the song's MV. 2D Dream Fever had elements placed behind Miku, keeping some of the screen dark to simulate as if actual props were beside Miku, and Raspberry Monster that had flat effects simulating the effect there's an LED screen behind Miku displaying these effects. A few others had basic extra visuals as well, some working better than others. Like Kaito's performance of Caged Flower, I'd say wasn't the best use, as the hanging flowers just highlighted the top edge of the screen and didn't really add much to the whole performance. Rocky had some additional speakers on stage, which framed the sides of the screen a little better. Sankyu had photos of past expos fly by, which was an amazing moment, but I feel immersion-wise, it could have been done a little better instead of some random cubes spawning in. Love is War had a prop like the megaphone tower behind Miku, although the fact it floated around to me seemed kind of off-putting, and I feel like it could have had a much more solid feel if it was just stationary behind her like an actual tower. Decorator also used the entire screen, however, the performance that used extra visuals that was most well received was the theme song for the event, Connect Commune, which featured the blurred MV of the song playing behind Miku alongside some TV props. Many people came out of the concert saying it was this performance that made them feel that Miku was actually standing there. The element of the blurred MV made Miku feel as if she was standing further forward on the stage, which elevated further as she stood in front of the TVs. And then they also used a technique which I think sold the illusion, which was extending the floor. You can see that the MV does not reach the bottom of the screen, but Miku does, creating the illusion that the MV is being projected on a screen further back to where Miku is standing, and that little gap is actually the floor, and so Miku is standing further forward as we can see the floor behind her. This technique is actually used in a few other performances that use visuals for the entire screen, like for Raspberry Monster, where these dots fade out the further up they go, and Kimagure Mercy, where you can see some of the floor tiles. This technique can be temperamental, as the angle of the viewer can distort how the illusion is portrayed, but for Kimagure Mercy for example, if we look from a higher view, we are able to see these floor tiles, but if we look from a lower view, we can't see them. So it's definitely something that is able to be executed and work well for all angles, that they can improve on further in the future. And the Miku Expo Tour was likely the best place they could have tested this, as all of the venues on this tour were a variety of different sizes, from small theatres to large arenas. So the team being able to view these experimental features in all of these different staging and environments and different viewing positions is likely very promising for their improvement, which we will definitely see again very soon for Magical Mirai, as although the third venue is a small theatre, the stage setup for Osaka and Tokyo are very different compared to Expo. Presuming they're going with the same setup type to previous years, the stage is much more elevated and is completely boxed in by the stage framing, so has the potential for more visual technique types to be explored for this specific type of setup. And honestly, Magical Mirai is the perfect testing ground for it. As much as the projector setup is loved for its holographicness, Magical Mirai hasn't really taken advantage of it in years. And instead, the screen has been completely boxed in with that empty space just being used as a void. The event honestly hasn't really used the benefits of the projector setup, only very recently adding something behind the glass, using a curtain behind it and lighting it up. But looking at the majority of performances from Magical Mirai 2023, this is very much just a dark void. Them lighting up behind the screen may have made them realise there is all this empty space around here that we've never really thought about before. What can we do to change that? And with that thought, they could have realised that the projectors cannot do what they want to explore to its best capacity, for example, a full background like Connect Commune's performance, that the projectors likely wouldn't be able to hold a full and constant brightness over every part of the screen to make it seem solid enough, and so wanted to switch Magical Mirai over to the LED screen to explore that possibility. It is possible that they saw the projectors would hold them back on fully exploring the type of performances they could achieve, and so decided to switch to a different medium that would allow them to explore without those limitations, which also includes being able to keep the same screen size for all events. Through the years of performing, there have been two main screen sizes used at the concerts. The smaller size, used for tours like Miku Expo and Miku With You, and the wider size that was, up until very recently, only used at Magical Mirai. And because of this, there became a divide, as some performances made for Magical Mirai could not be performed on the smaller screen, due to that performance spanning the entire width of the wider screen. So if they wanted one of these songs with a wider performance to perform outside of Magical Mirai, they either had to be remade entirely, or the existing performance had to be adjusted, which the latter often didn't come out very clean and had characters sliding about. So it was very likely in the decision process of making the performances, they had to stop and consider, will we ever want this song to perform overseas? Or even, do we want this song to perform more often than just Magical Mirai? And if the answer was yes, they had to create a performance so it fit within the bounds of the smaller screen, which as time went on, the majority of new performances were created within this smaller boundary, leaving the majority of the wider screen unused, which has been a shame, as we could have had more performances using this entire space, which could have led to even more creative performances that they've been unable to try out because they were restricted to this smaller boundary. The wider projector setup was, and likely still isn't, practical to tour with, as it was only used at one-stop events, or events that had weeks between shows. However, the LED screen does not have that restriction, already proven to be quick and easy to set up during the 2024 tour, so adding a few extra panels likely would not hurt, and so they can bring this wider screen overseas, allowing previously unable to perform songs on the smaller screen, like Shake It, to be performed overseas, which would have never been possible if they stuck to the projector setup, as this wider projector setup is just not practical to tour with, and the only way it would have ever been used overseas was if they did a one-stop show, which unfortunately, the demand for the concerts now is just way too high for it to be practical for them to just do a single show in an overseas location, when instead they can tour that overseas location with a much more practical setup. which was previously the smaller projector setup and is now currently the LED setup. This swap now allows all events to be using the same size screen, so they can now, without second thoughts, create a performance that takes up the entirety of the space on the screen without any worry, which could lead to many interesting opportunities they did not see as worth it before, as previously it would have been a lot of time and money into a performance that could only be performed at one event, which from the previous interviews we know Crypton could not afford, as these concerts cost a lot of money and they need to reuse as many assets as they can to try and get that cost down. So by creating a single standard screen over all of the events, they're able to maximize their creativity and exploration of the performances without worry, which increases both their practicality and their stylistic exploration. Obviously, this is all speculation. Crypton have yet to explain their exact reasoning for why they have seemingly decided to drop the projector setup, and it's possible they never will, or they will explain at Magical Mirai, as that is the switch that almost confirms that the projector setup is being retired, at least for the time being, and it's the event that the switch has stirred the most people, so may see it as best fit to explain their reasonings then. But as of right now, all we have are the theories of the practical reasons and the stylistic reasons. That the projector setup is likely much more expensive to rent, transport and set up compared to the LED screen, a fact of which Crypton have been confirmed to be trying to find a new way to cut those costs ever since they realised how big the demand for concerts were, that the LED screen is much less prone to imaging issues, both from its own setup and the external light show, and is able to provide a more constant and secure brightness for the much larger venues that Miku is constantly proving she's able to sell out, and that these shows have had a constant standard for 15 years with very little exploration, which they are now dipping their toes into, and maybe found that the projector setup is not cut out for the type of stuff they want to try out, so need to shift over to a different type of technology to bring those visions to life. All of which are very valid possible reasons. The introduction of the LED screen into Miku concerts should have been carried out so much better and more carefully than it did in the first place, as it was a very poor way to introduce this stark different medium to a scene that has been the same for 14 years straight. But from the basic standpoint, it is clear that its introduction has the potential to completely shift the scene into a whole new direction that had never once been thought possible. And regardless of the poor decisions at the beginning, it should be given the chance to reach its full potential before it can be confidently said, this is worse than the projector setup and they should never have switched. Both of these setups have massive pros and cons that unfortunately I think a lot of people can't see due to their adoration and nostalgia of the projector setup. Not saying you're not allowed to prefer the projectors, but I think for a lot of people, even with some of the obvious points that the LED screen does do objectively better, for example not having any light stick reflections distorting the screen, they still deny and say the projectors are 100% better, which objectively is not true. The projector setup has its flaws. That is a fact. And the LED screen also has its flaws. That is another fact. But what is also a fact is that Crypton are shifting to using the LED screen, and instead of running at it with pitchforks, it should be given time to fully explore its potential, as the projector setup has had 15 years of shows under its belt compared to the LED screens too. And so far, in those 2 years, it has shown massive growth, exploration and potential from its use from North America 2024 to the Project Voltage live show. And if that growth continues, it could very well lead to us questioning in a few years' time why we ever wanted the projector setup to return. But that is up to Crypton to prove that Hatsune Miku concerts can evolve beyond what we already know. Hopefully this video has helped you view the screen switch in a different light, or helped you realise something about it you may not have even thought about before. I don't expect this debate to die off anytime soon. Even if Crypton creates the absolute best shows imaginable with the LED screen, I think there will always be people saying that the projectors are better. But I do think it's better for people to be educated on all the possible whys to this switch, as it likely wasn't done lightly, instead of people just jumping to, it's Crunchyroll's fault. Which I'm still seeing people say, by the way, despite the recent NA tour having zero Crunchyroll sponsorship, and even Magical Mirai switching, which Crunchyroll would never be near in the first place, let alone be able to influence the event. As someone who has seen both the projector setup and the LED setup in person, I can see a lot of the potential the LED screen has that the projector setup likely could not execute as well, but I do also understand the magic that the projector setup made us feel that the LED screen is still catching up in sparking, which I think it will catch up soon as Miku's 20th anniversary is next year, and I find it hard to believe that they would go into it without perfecting the LED screen, lest her huge anniversary become a letdown, much like what happened for Miku Expo's 10th anniversary. And it could still be possible that all of this exploration with the LED screen could lead Crypton back to the projector setup if they find that their experimentation isn't leading to what they want, much like how they tried out the R3 technology, which was testing real-time lighting reflecting on the models, and also testing Miku reacting to audiences in real time, which was being tested and tried out for a few years, but now these models that were created for this technology are slowly being phased out and re-rendered, so the conclusion of that experimentation must have been not what they wanted, or too expensive maybe, and led them back to the standard models, or it can even lead them to exploring different technologies, like transparent LEDs, which are a thing and have been used pretty well in certain cases, which Crypton may want to try out as well, but for the time being, it is the LED setup, and we'll just have to wait and see where it leads them.